on this episode of Clear the Air.
This is actually something funny. As I got on the bus, and I realized really quickly that on these buses, they have these vendors that walk up and down on the bus, and they sell candy. And what I noticed really quick was that these people didn't pay to get on the bus. And what I figured is my school was only 4 stops away from my house. So what do you think I did to save a couple of pesos? And you see trucks and nice cars and Mercedes and BMWs. You see nice cars driving over here in the left lanes. And then you see us driving here. And then over on this side, on the highway, you see donkey carts and people riding camels. It's like the right 2 lanes were reserved for donkey carts and camels.
Yeah, 2 experiences I had with food were when I went back later to Japan for business. The first one...
What was that?
Hopefully someone didn't die.
Hello, this is Nate Jones, and we're here for another episode of Clear the Air podcast, and I'm here with Joel Melton.
Hey, everybody.
In a couple of our previous episodes, I know we haven't had a ton of them, but in a couple of them, I've actually discussed the times that I've lived overseas, that I've spent overseas. I've spent a lot of time traveling, and I've spent some time living overseas, and how that actually played a large part in the formation of who I am. So we thought we would have a little chat about that today. Because Joel here, Joel, you've lived overseas. Where have you lived?
I've lived overseas in Japan for 2 years.
And how was that?
It was quite interesting, a lot shorter. Had to duck through all the doorways. I'm 6'4", so their doorways came to about my eyebrows, and had to duck through the doorways. But it was great. Great place to live. Excellent food, of course. I loved it. But it was quite interesting, the differences between them and what they do there, even in infrastructure, in transportation, all of that, and compared to where I grew up in Los Angeles. Okay. Where have you been?
Where have I been? I've been all over.
Where have you lived?
So the very first time that I left the U.S. for a significant time, I just turned 15, I believe. It was 85. I would have just turned 15, and my family, all 14 siblings, not all 14. There was 2 of them that were already in college, or 3 that were already in college. But we moved down to Mexico City in Mexico. And at this point, I had lived in St. Anthony, Idaho, which is a town of a couple of thousand people. And so we went from that to Mexico City, which is a lot bigger. Let's just say a lot bigger. I think at that point it was the biggest, if not one of the top 5 largest cities on the planet. And it was an amazing experience. I could tell you so many things about that helped form who I am. The other places that I've lived is I lived in Argentina for a couple of years. I don't want to say that I lived back in Mexico again, but when I was working as a commercial diver, I did work for Pemex, which is Petroleros Mexicanos in Mexico, working in the Bahia de Campeche. And where the Bahia de Campeche is it's the Gulf of Mexico, but the Gulf of Mexico comes along Texas, and then it goes down in there, and there's it's not a little bay, it's a big bay, but it's where a lot of the Mexican oil is pumped out of. And we did a lot of work down there, and so I was down there. But that was actually a pretty interesting experience too. But I've spent a lot of time traveling around other parts of the world. I mean, my next big country that I would like to go to is Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, because I've never been to any of the stands, and I'm looking forward to doing that at some point. I just need to find a good reason and excuse. Not that I should have one. I just should go and do it. So anyways, but, it has shaped my perspective on life.
Well, and I think it doesn't even matter what age you go to these places. There's such a difference in culture and infrastructure and those that play an influence on that. What are some of the lessons that you've learned as you've been living these life lessons maybe, or things that have helped form yourself?
So when we moved to Mexico City, I learned really quick how to speak passable Spanish, and then I don't know that I've ever learned to speak fluent Spanish. 4 years in Spanish-speaking countries, I'm still kind of okay. So when we moved to Mexico City, we actually got there. Anybody that's old like me, and I think it was 85 in August, right around there of 85, there was a big earthquake in Mexico City. And we got there like 2 days before that happened, and we were sitting in a hotel. My parents were looking for a house, and the first earthquake happened, and there was all kinds of destruction. I mean, buildings fell. Most of them that actually fell were government buildings, and that was my first, inefficiencies of government. My first real exposure to that, because as a 15-year-old in the U.S. growing up in Idaho, you don't really interact with the government. And then after that, I mean, we had a house in I want to say the northern part of Mexico City. I don't even know how to say it, but it's like something like that. up by Lomas Verdes, I can say that one, or Satélite. We used to go down to the mall at Satélite, which at that point I think there was only one or two malls in Mexico. One of the things that I did there is I learned really quick how to get on the bus. Like, we rode the public bus, just the regular bus to work, not to work, to school. This is actually something funny. Is I got on the bus and I realized really quickly that on these buses they have these vendors that walk up and down on the bus, and they sell candy and chili, little packs of chili powder that people eat. It's just salt and chili, or sugar and chili, and M&Ms and candies. And what I noticed really quick was that these people didn't pay to get on the bus. The bus drivers would let them on the bus, and they would go on and ride on and sell product. And then they would get off the bus and, in 2 or 3 stops and get on the next bus. And what I figured is my school was only 4 stops away from my house. So what do you think I did to save a couple of pesos? I bought some candy, and I started selling candy on the bus.
Nice.
And you just walk up and down going, hey, M&Ms, and people would pay you for it. And so that was really, one of my first, outside of catching fish and selling them as a child in Idaho, I think that was one of my first
entrepreneurial
endeavors.
Yes.
Yeah. But I learned that pretty quick. We interacted. I went to a total Spanish-speaking school. I had a great time in Mexico. And, when we were not in school, we drove out and we would go out in this, it was actually kind of hell when I say this. We had a big 16-passenger van that did not have air conditioning. And when you put, 10, 11 kids in that, and you're driving around in Mexico, that can get pretty hot pretty quick. And so we would stop in every town that we went through, and you'd go to the city center, and they would have these people selling the paletas. I think that's what they were called. But they're fruit juice and pulp that's frozen on a stick, like we would have a popsicle. But these people would have, they call them paletas, but it was mostly fruit juice and fruit pulp that they blended up and froze on a stick, and that's what you ate that was cold. And so we had a great time. We drove down to, I'm trying to remember if we drove down to Cancun from Mexico City. I think we did. I know we drove to Acapulco. Had a great time there. So
tell me, did you move for Dad's work? Did you move for...
No, my dad continued to work in the United States, and he would fly down every other week. He would work for a week. He was, again, a physician, but he would work for a week, and then he would come down to Mexico for a week and hang out, and then he'd go home and work for a week and come back.
Oh, so yeah, he was still working at a practice coming down.
At that point, he was working as a practice in Idaho, but a small-town country doctor in a small town in Idaho can't really support a family of 14 children on that. And so by this time, he'd actually now he's working as an ER doc.
Oh.
Just so he could get the bills paid.
Yeah, right, for sure. So 2 years down there, went to a fully Spanish-speaking school?
We only lived there 1 year.
1 year?
We lived there for 1 year, and then we came back here to Utah. I mean, that's kind of a foreign country in and of itself.
Yeah. I had a similar experience. I went to Japan as a young adult, and my parents left Los Angeles and moved to Utah. So I left a foreign country and came to a foreign country, basically, when I came back here, just because of the difference from L.A. to South Salt Lake area. But a couple of things.
I'm just glad that you admit that it is, because you're still here, which tells me that Utah is way better than L.A. But all you people in California, don't come here. We're already overcrowded.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I admit I have no reason to leave. I love it. I love the climate. Even though it's hot. Oh, yeah. It's terrible. It's terrible here. Do not come. So a lot of things while I was living abroad, the infrastructure, the bus system in Japan is incredible, but the train system is even better. You can run the clocks by the train system. Then it was interesting because they'd have this technology, but then you'd walk on the streets and they'd have open sewers. I mean, it was just running against the road. And so a lot of times they had it covered with, a concrete kind of flat brick on top. But when you get out in the country, it was just running across the road. And every once in a while you'd catch a mom with a kid in their bike and they'd pull off and see the kid peeing in the gutter as they were riding by. And so there was this contrast between this great infrastructure, but then they had some primitiveness to it, even though it's considered a first world
But they
country.
weren't bathing in it.
Fortunately, they weren't bathing in that. Yes, they have their bathhouses is where they went for that, so that's the good. But you'd see that, and then you'd see how they interacted. I was interesting. I grew up with my father was worked for the LA County Sheriffs, and so I was interested. And you get to Japan, and none of the cops, well, some of them do, but very rare do you see them carry a weapon. They have a billy club or a nightstick type thing, but no guns throughout. And so I think that was an interesting. Comparing the two between where I grew up and my dad would come home with a full gun belt on and, coming home from on duty or at the prison or whatever. And then you go there and a lot of them ride bikes and it's pretty low key there for that. And so there's some similarities, but there's a lot of things that you learn different. And I think the immersiveness, like you explained, learning the language was tough because we had to read from Romanized Japanese at first, which spelt it out like our English alphabet. But being there in immersiveness, seeing their characters and talking to them, I think helped, but it taught quite a bit difference of how their culture is compared to what we grew up with basically here in the United States. So
do you still speak Japanese?
I speak Japanese, yes. When I came home from there, I had worked for a company that was owned by a Japanese company, and so we had surgeons coming over.
Toyota?
Yeah, no. So we had surgeons come over, and I would stay with them for a weekend and go into the operating room and translate for them. And so, I had a lot of experience, and I could hold a conversation right now. It's been 30 years since I came back, but I could certainly hold a conversation.
Yeah, at least Spanish is spoken all over, so every year, at least once or twice, I'll go somewhere where I'm speaking Spanish. So.
Yeah. It's been probably 5 years since I've had a conversation in Japanese, but went there quite a bit when I was working for the company that it was there, so that helped as well. So, but anyway, so what other funny experiences have you had outside of the United States?
Funny?
Yes.
I've had lots of funny experiences, but I don't know.
Any that you can tell us?
There was one interesting and this was actually in Cairo, and it's one of the funniest, oddest things. And I think it was like the first or second time that I'd been there. And they just finished building this. It's called the Ring Road that goes around Cairo, and it was on the outskirts 23 years ago. Now it's not, but we get on this and we're in a taxi, and this is it would be banned from being on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere here in the U.S. Like you could look through the rusted out floor and see the road as you're cruising down the road. And you get on this ring road, and you see trucks and nice cars and Mercedes and BMWs. You see nice cars driving over here in the left lanes. And then you see us driving here. And then over on this side, on the highway, you see donkey carts and people riding camels. And it was so hilarious. It's like the right two lanes were reserved for donkey carts and camels. And you'd see these people sitting out there on their camels on their cell phone. And we busted up laughing.
Right.
We thought that was hilarious. One of the other things I learned, though, was before you say you don't want to eat a food, you should try it. When I was in Argentina, somebody gave me some their empanadas. They're a little I don't know, dumpling, I guess, but they're not boiled. With some meat and stuff, and I tasted it, and I'm like, oh, this is really good. This is really good. And then they told me what was in it, and I'm like, but it was actually tripe, which a lot of people around the world eat tripe, and it was good. It tasted good, but I still, it's like it's just a disconnect about that.
Yeah, two experiences I had with food were when I went back later to Japan for business. The first one,
What was that?
hopefully someone didn't die. The first one I had, and I had never had it before, was oxtail soup. And it wasn't that I wasn't willing to eat it. I just had never heard of that before, just never had experienced that, and I certainly couldn't afford it as a volunteer missionary when I was living there previously. But it was actually pretty good. And,
Oxtail?
Oxtail soup.
Why is that expensive?
Well, it just wasn't something you had to go to a
just-
restaurant.
Water with an oxtail thrown into it.
Well, they had other things, but it came with a meal, and we didn't eat out a lot.
So
we were eating spaghetti.
One of my favorite meals that I've ever had in my life was in Japan.
Yeah.
So while you were there, did you have some Kobe beef and some shabu shabu?
Yes. Shabu shabu is by far one of the best meals.
Did you have it with Kobe beef?
Yes. But it was only when I went back as business, so we could afford it.
Oh.
But yeah, it was incredible. The shabu shabu is a great meal, and certainly we didn't eat a lot of sushi as missionaries because it was too expensive. We ate a lot when I went back with business, and we were out there on a fishing cruise that I had some doctors with, and it was incredible. We were way in the south, almost down into Korea, and
Korea's not Okinawa.
Yeah, we were right by Okinawa, and so they caught the fish. We took it right to the hotel, and they made sushi out of it right there. It was pretty incredible. But they also, at that point, made blowfish, which I'd never had before, and you of course got to be careful with that as sushi. And I don't love all the sushis. There's some that I really like, but it was pretty good having that fresh sushi right off.
See, I've never lived in Japan, so I don't like sushi. Sorry.
I ate it more here than I ever did there, but yeah.
Okay.
So that was an interesting thing there, but it was interesting living in Japan because I lived far away from the city. We were they call it Inaka, or the country, maybe outside of the city limits, and a different type of people in terms of, a lot of times there's business people from other countries, U.S., Europe, that they see, but we surprised a lot of people. I was walking around, and I didn't have my knowledge hair that I have right now. It was quite a bit darker and curlier. And still, I was tall enough that people would look and see, and they would be surprised. And I remember I was a L.A. Lakers fan, grew up in L.A. They had won all the championships they did in the 80s. And I had a shirt that I took with me, a T-shirt that had a caricature of all of the players. And one of them was Kurt Rambis, and he was notorious for wearing his glasses just like this. He'd wear those playing, and they were cat-eye glasses. I had glasses back then that I wore full time, and I remember walking to some youth kids, and I had this on because it was the day we were playing athletics. And they looked at that, and I guess I'm admitting that I told a white lie, or I didn't admit.
You said it was you?
I didn't say it was me. They pointed to it and said, "Is that you?" Because it was the only white guy on the shirt, and I had glasses on it, and I had the shirt on, so they thought it was me. So they started asking me for my autograph, and I started signing my autograph, and I realized they can't read it anyway because I was signing my own name. It didn't even say Kurt Rambis on it, but
Kurt,
I was, yes. Yeah, so that was
I know Kurt's listening to this right now.
so the people in Japan love Kurt Rambis now because I was signing autographs.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've never actually had that happen to me, where people come up to me and ask me for anything. But I went over to India with my children, with the family, a number of years ago, and I'm trying to remember how old they were. I think they were 4 and 6, and it was like swatting flies. I mean, it was everybody wanted to come over and take a picture because they were blonde haired. I mean, I don't, they're not blonde. They are kind of blonde. I mean, to me, they're not blonde. To me, they're sandy brown, I guess.
Yeah.
But to the people in India, they were like blonde, and everybody was coming over there and wanting to take pictures. And we had to sit there finally and go, no, because you couldn't go anywhere because everybody wanted to take a picture with them.
Yeah.
People would just come and stand in line and want to take pictures. I mean, they're next time you see my kids, ask them, just say, hey, how was India? Do you remember, were people always want to take your picture? And they'll go off, and one of them is like, yes, it was horrible. And Natalie, the younger one, would be like, yes, and it was so great. Everyone want to take my picture.
Yeah, that's the reaction we got all the time walking around, similar to that. They weren't taking pictures, but they're always walking up and saying pisu. They would say peace to us. And they thought that was their extent of English, or they'd say, hello, how are you? Because they learned English from a young age there. But I think there's some interesting differences in where I grew up in the U.S. and where it happened there and what they do. And the school system was interesting because they do teach from early age. They're teaching them English right to begin with. And I found an interesting aspect of that was they didn't know how to have a conversation all the time, but they knew a lot of vocabulary. They knew sentence structure. And, it isn't till late in middle school or junior high school that they start teaching language here. There are some immersive programs where they start them early. But I think that's one thing that would benefit a lot of schools here.
I actually think, and this is something that my dad and I have had many discussions about, but I think that our society could be improved if more people went to other countries to see that other cultures. I think, and I think I've said this before, is that our culture in the United States is very American-centric. Donald Trump goes out in America first. For political purposes, I don't mind that. But we should be able to not just look at the world from our point of view, but we should be able to look at it from the Mexicans' point of view, from the Canadians, from the Argentinians, from the Japanese, from the Chinese. We should be able to look at it from their point of view and make sure that we're doing what we can to fit into that while we're taking care of our own business at home. And I don't think that the American citizens, the people in America, get out of America enough to fully understand those. And my dad actually proposed, and I thought it was a great idea. I don't know why our government doesn't do it, because no one's ever told them. I think I've told Mike Lee about this. He's our senator here in Utah, Mike. You should listen more often. But what he suggested is that when people sign up for the military, they sign up for 3 years. Your first 2 years, you go in and you do a lot of training, and then you go to your duty station and whatnot. And he thinks that there should be a requirement in there that when you're training, you learn a language. And then that third year, you actually go to another country. So like if you're learning Spanish, then the last year you go and you do training, but your training is being done where you're facilitating, helping, and doing humanitarian missions in a Spanish-speaking country. So now you have the military training, you speak Spanish, you are exposed to a foreign culture, and after that you come back, and if you want to re-up, you re-up. And then you go and you do that with another language. So let's say you go do it with French, and then you go work in a French country, or you go do it with Portuguese, and you go do it. And so what happens is the people in our military start getting more understanding of other cultures. And as they go up through the ranks, that will help change not just public policy in the military itself, but it'll help change public policy in the country, because there are a lot of people in the military that have never been overseas. Yeah. And when there's a lot of people in the country that have never been out of the country, and there's a lot of people in the military that could come back and share those experiences with them.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. It's not just about the appreciation of what you have where you go somewhere, but I think that integration of learning of the different culture, comparing it, and living back in your own culture just broadens your total viewpoint of everyone and everything. And I think it fits in every aspect, whether it's politics, work, religion, whatever it is, to have that wide view of things, because it sure makes a difference and helps, I guess just assimilation all over, but helps you as an individual to maybe understand better, but also appreciate.
I think it does. I mean, I probably should have brought this up earlier, but I think one of the biggest things that I learned when I lived in Mexico when I was 15 is, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. We grew up in a small town, average. I don't know how you say it, middle class, I guess. What I learned in Mexico when I lived in Mexico, one of the first things I learned was that, everybody hears the adage that money doesn't buy happiness. And you would go down and you would see people in Mexico who had a tenth of what I had. and they're happy. I mean, it's the happiest people in the world are not the people that have the most stuff. You know, I don't think I'm the happiest person in the world. I mean, as an American, I have a lot of stuff because Americans, we all have a lot of stuff because a lot of us think that buys happiness, but it really doesn't. And I think I learned that more outside of the U.S. than I have here. I see more happy people living in poverty than I see happy people with lots of stuff here in the U.S.
Yeah. No, I think that's true because it's definitely culture driven, I think. Here it's about acquiring and putting your status. In many of the countries, it's about giving something that you have. And I don't think people aren't gracious here and they're not giving. But in general, like you said, if that's the requirement or kind of what the culture is, acquiring things makes you somehow feel you have status. But I noticed even in Japan, you had to be very careful when you recognized something in someone's house. And if it was something expensive, they would go get it off the shelf and give it to you and say, here you go. So I looked for the most expensive things I could find and always complimented it and came home with it. No, I'm just kidding. That was the tough thing is you had to be very careful of saying, hey, that's a nice picture. It wouldn't happen all the time, especially if it was an heirloom, but a lot of times there were things where they would say, well, here, take this. And there was no denying it. They would just hammer you till you walked away with it. So I think that was something to be careful
Really?
of.
So when am I coming over for dinner?
That's right. Yeah, we'd pick the right houses. So,
anyways, hopefully this has been interesting, having a conversation of people that have lived out of the country. Hopefully, it's something that people can learn. But I think that everybody should put it in their, to-do list. I don't want to say a bucket list, but to-do list. That they should get out and see other cultures. And if you can take your kids and expose them to other cultures when they're kids, I think it's even better.
I agree. So, final question, and you get one answer. One word, not one answer, one word.
No.
If you could move anywhere and live abroad, what's your country? You said you want to visit the stands. Where would you move your family to live and get an experience?
Where would I move my family to?
To get that experience and all the places you visited. Who knows?
I don't know.
What about a continent?
I would actually. I'm trying to think this through. I would probably say I would for sure go to India. Europe is the easy out answer, but I don't think that there's a huge cultural difference between the U.S. and Europe. I mean, there is, but it's not huge. And my brother, who works for an aircraft company that has doors fall off, but he just had the opportunity to go either work in India for a year or in Ireland, and I wanted to violently have a discussion with him because he went to Ireland, and he had a great time. I mean, from Ireland, they took their kids and they would buy these cheap airfares. And they would fly over to France and Germany, and they'd go do all these castles and stuff. But if you have 1 year, to go and do something, yeah, he taught them about European history, but to go and expose them to the culture of India, I mean, I would have gone to India in a heartbeat. The only question that I have is, and why I was hesitating to say that was, I'm thinking about the security of my. I just finished telling you the story about how everybody wants to come over and touch them.
Sure.
And as they get older and they go out by themselves, I would be more concerned about the security of that. And in order to protect them from that, then you would have to isolate them from that culture that you want them to be a part of. And you see that a lot. I mean, you see that so much. When I would first start to travel, you go to Russia, you go to Thailand, you go to China, and you have these expat communities. You have communities where it's, they all live like on a city block or two, and it's like little America. And to me, that isn't what I want. So that's what I was trying to think of. I would love to take them to India and let them live there. Just the way that people were coming up and wanting to touch them and stuff like that, I don't know that I could provide a secure environment where they could still take advantage of being in that other civilization. Sure. Yeah. So without all of that, I would probably say someplace in Latin America. Their mom is from Brazil. I would like maybe Argentina or Chile. It's not as far different, but you get to learn another language. A language is very good for people. I think Spanish is a big language, one of the big ones. I think Spanish, Arabic, English, Portuguese, or So
Makes sense.
why, where would you live?
Well, my easy answer was Europe, right? But there's too much similarities. I'd love to spend some time in Scotland.
Well, then you have to say it right. Scotland.
Yeah, Scotland.
Get to go to Scotland.
I'd love to go there, but I think I agree with you. My ultimate would be somewhere in Latin America. I think those areas would be interesting, big enough change, and some of that original culture still exists there. You get out far enough out of the cities. That seems like somewhere interesting.
Okay, well, it's another episode of Clear the Air podcast. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully that's going to motivate you to take your kids and your families and go travel the world. And if you get the opportunity, go move out somewhere out of the country. It doesn't have to be permanent. You can go for a month or two. Come back if you don't like it, or go somewhere else. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you. For Kurt Rambis, signing off. Peace.
This episode was hosted by Nathan Jones, co-hosted by Joel Melton, produced by David Monk. Associate producer, Matthew Davis. Video and audio were edited by Caleb Scoresby. Research by Sabre Bills. Graphics by Joseph Thornton. Music by Augusto Diniz. If you enjoyed this episode of Clear the Air, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest episode. Have a favorite episode? Share it with a friend or on social media. New episodes of Clear the Air are published weekly on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.